This is The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours along the way, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. Hi there, everyone. I am so happy to share today's episode featuring David Lane Williams, a former police officer who just published his debut novel, Carousel Grift, after a very long journey. You might assume that David's novel is crime fiction or a detective novel, but actually, as he explains in this episode, it might be considered women's fiction. It follows Callie Wind, a single mom and owner of a quirky Texas amusement park, who is dealing with her estranged televangelist daughter and the ghostly antics of her dead father. In this episode, we talk about David's journey to publishing his two nonfiction books, as well as this debut novel. And let me tell you, David's journey to publication has more twists and turns than an amusement park ride, so buckle up, everybody. Before we start, a quick reminder to rate and review the podcast and consider sharing about the long road to publishing on social media or to writing friends. Thanks so much for listening. And now on with the episode, which I am calling The Cop Who Caught the Writing Bug. David Lane Williams is a paramedic and police officer veteran with assignments including helicopter rescue, mental health liaison, and special investigations unit detective. During his 30-year career, Williams was twice named Officer of the Year by the Fraternal Order of Police, and he has been recognized by the Rotary Club, the American Legion, and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center for his work with families and children in crisis. Williams is a monthly columnist with Killer Nashville magazine. He teaches criminology at the University of Arkansas and is a best-selling author on topics related to violence prevention and victimology. He and his family have settled in the Ozark Mountains, where they offer a haven for donkeys and horses who have previously endured a rough life. His debut novel, Carousel Grift, was just released on October 23rd. Welcome, David, to The Long Road to Publishing.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I am glad that you're here too. So, before we go into, I know you've told me it was a very long journey to getting this novel out into the world, but I do have to ask about the donkeys and the horses. How did you get into that?
Well, it actually came before us. This property has belonged to my wife's family since the 1870s. Her cousin has moved back from Dallas. She was in Dallas for 40 or something years, moved back here and started doing this kind of horse and donkey rescue. And then we moved here eventually. We wanted to get here a long time ago. We finally got here. We had to move around a lot and had a great time doing that. But we got here. Now we're helping. We're part of that. So
Yeah, how many donkeys and horses do you have on your property?
2 donkeys, 2 horses, and 2 ponies. And the ponies are sometimes the biggest maintenance factor. They
The
come up
little
to
ones
our
make the most trouble, right?
they really do. They're like the loudest little kids or whatever, but they're pretty funny.
How cool. Well, okay, so let's talk about your publishing journey and your writing life. When did you get interested in writing, or when did you decide you were going to write a book and get it published? And I guess for you, I'm not sure what we should start with because I know you have the nonfiction books, but then I know you've always had this passion for writing fiction as well.
I knew I was going to be a writer when I was 13 years old. 2 things happened when I was 13. I read a book called Serpico, which was about a cop in New York City during a time when they had a lot of corruption. And it was a hard R book. A 13-year-old probably should not have been reading it, but I took it off my dad's bookshelf. And Serpico was a real man, and he really bucked the system in terms of corruption and was courageous and was set up for a murder by his fellow officers. And I just was enamored by this man. And I knew by the time I finished that book, I was going to grow up and be an honest cop. And so, but the same year, my dad finished his PhD dissertation, and he had done it on this Texas Instrument, this orange Texas Instrument electric typewriter, and he couldn't stand to look at the thing anymore. He said, I don't want it. You can have it. And so I took that and I wrote this thing that, I mean, it was really derivative. It was like a Justice League, Superman, and all his friends fighting bad guys. And that's what I wrote with different characters. It was pretty awful, but I was 13, and that was the bug. That's when the bug hit, and I knew I was going to write. And I've always taken pride in my writing throughout my career. I wrote for Journal of Emergency Medical Service and other sort of trade publications. And my wife and I joke, I wrote really good police reports. In fact, she was a journalist and covered police stories as part of her mission. And she knew me from my reports before she and I ever met. And when we
Oh,
started
was
dating, she
she
said,
impressed by
she
your
was,
police
she was.
reports?
And I know you. You wrote that report on blah, blah, blah. And I went, wow, okay, that was pretty cool. And because of that, I ended up writing the lion's share of search warrant affidavits for my division. I worked in a special investigations unit for most of my career. So that was violent and predatory crimes, primarily against women and children. So there was a lot of documentation writing that went with that. And I was always sort of writing nonfiction articles. And then a couple of books came out, one on how employers and employees and friends can help somebody stuck in a domestic violence vortex. And I wrote my master's thesis on how to prevent school shootings. And then I took all that research and made it into a commercial venture, and that became one of the books. So I've been doing the nonfiction stuff for a long time. But you're right. I've wanted to be a novelist for as long as I can remember, going back to those
Yeah.
that comic book stuff.
You at 13, you read this book and you were like, okay, I know I want to be a cop, but then you also at the same time knew you wanted to be a writer. And
Hmm.
so you've kind of had both of those dreams ever since you were, that young and then you've pursued them both. So
I did.
police work, there's maybe we'll get into more of kind of the misconceptions that you try to dispel with police work, but that it is a lot of writing. It's a lot of writing reports, right?
If you're good at it, and especially as a detective, you're going to write a lot of reports. You have to document every single conversation, and it's got to be done in a way that judges and juries will understand later. I think that's critically important for police officers to be able to document well the decision-making process that they took. And it makes for better cases. It makes for more transparency in government, and across the board, police officers should be doing more of that.
Yeah. Well, so when you said you did your master's on, and you said how to prevent school shootings was your
That was my
thesis?
thesis. Uh-huh.
Yeah, which is I mean, I have two young children who are in school right now, so I'm like, yes, please, we need that. But then you said you turned that research into a book, and how did you do that? Did you do that yourself? Did you find a publisher for it, or?
Yeah, for the thesis, it was pretty academic. So in that, I related stories that I'd lived. I'm one of the few officers in the nation that has actually encountered a living school shooter in a
Oh, wow.
different violent case, and I investigated him and then went to arrest him, and we thwarted a couple of planned shootings in my schools, and I was the mental health liaison for my department for a number of years. So a lot of that went into play, and so just speaking from my own experience and telling stories is what I like to do anyway. It made it a
Mm-hmm.
more commercially approachable book. It's not a fun book. I mean, you're talking about awful things, but at least it is compelling, I hope, and people can, PTOs and parents and teachers and school administrators can take that information and hopefully make their school a little bit safer.
And so then how did you find a publisher for it, or did you self-publish, or how did that work?
So this is part of that long road we're talking about. I had an agent, and she was working on it, and very, very nice woman, good in terms of helping me edit, and was shopping it around. And then she was in Hurricane Sandy in New
Oh,
Jersey. She
wow.
was living in New
Uh-huh.
Jersey. And the stress of that ended up giving her life-threatening pneumonia, and she had a stroke. and
Oh gosh.
she retired. And so, and bless her heart, I mean, obviously it was disappointing to us because we were,
Hmm.
in this forward momentum, but gosh, there's just nothing to be done about that. And so somewhere in that process, I was going to some writers group. That's what we do. We go to writers groups and critique groups. And I was there and I met this couple, and they had their own publishing company. And I looked at their titles, I looked at their covers, I looked at the work that they had done with other authors, and I liked it. And so I pitched them, and they picked up that book on domestic violence. Then a couple of years later, they picked up the one on school shootings, 10-L Publishing. And they were really good to me and helpful, and I appreciate them.
Okay. Well, so yeah, so now I feel like I'm gonna rewind a little bit and tell me about your agent who you had. How did you find her, and were you querying her with nonfiction projects or fiction projects?
I queried her with nonfiction. I met her at a writers conference,
Do you remember which one?
probably Dallas. I think it was a Dallas Fort Worth writers conference.
And so you met, and you was it one of these one-on-one
hmm It
kind
was
of?
they had a pitch session, and I think I had 7 minutes or something like that. Not quite 10 minutes. I remember that. If you go to a pitch session, you get 10 minutes. That's like a luxury. You're on a cruise ship. You can talk all day long, but those ones that are 5 or 7 minutes, you better be on your game.
Yeah. Well, and I always recommend, even though it can be so intense to go and do the one-on-one pitching, there is something special about meeting somebody in person, and then they're more likely, I think, to if they say, oh, okay, go ahead and send me your query, then they're like, oh yeah, I remember that person. I don't know. There can be something special about that in-person connection. And maybe you tell me how we get into talking about your fiction writing. Because this is, your nonfiction books, but then I know you've had a long journey with the fiction writing. So maybe tell me about what the first novel you wrote or the first manuscript you wrote, and then we'll go from there.
So this one that's coming out is called Carousel Grift, and it came about. I'd been doing other stuff, short stories and things like that for a while, and worked on a thriller, paramedic thriller for a while, and earning my way, getting my chops, becoming a writer, becoming better at it.
Mhm.
And just so much of that is the experience is just doing it, just getting in and doing it, and being really honest with yourself in terms of critiquing, listening to other people and not getting defensive when they critique you, and being very open to that. So 2009 or 10, I was working in the Special Investigations Unit. There were two things going on. I started my career in Austin, Texas, and then about midway through, we moved to Northwest Arkansas. And so I took a job with the police department here. And one of the things that was going on at that time was there was a carnival, a traveling carnival that would winter in this city where I was working. And they leased some property on the south side of town, and all the roller coasters and tilt-a-whirls and Ferris wheels and carousels were out there in this lot, and somewhere in a shed, in a storage building, and somewhere out in the open. And those carnies would hit town. And you knew because your caseload went up. The patrol guys knew there were more drunk, disorderly people. Some of them were just hilarious. They were just cards and so funny to talk to. And some of them were pretty sinister. And in my division, we dealt with them as suspects in pretty awful crimes. And so, but the whole dynamic of that quirkiness and an edge to it really appealed to me in terms of a novel. I was really kind of trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to write? I want a big project. I want to write a novel, and I want it to be something that I'm really proud of. So that was part of it. And then the cases I was working, these, primarily women and children are the victims of violent crime. And going back to the domestic violence book, so much of that has to do with women who are trapped for whatever reason. You can
Mm.
you can judge them,
Hmm.
but you're wrong to judge them. They have reasons for why they stay. We may not agree with them, but our job is to be ready when they're ready. And offer them services from us, from social workers, from mental health care, from relocation services, the whole holistic plan to help people leave a violent situation. And it was such a touchdown moment when people could finally do that. And I mean, that
Yeah.
was just like most, my proudest moment was when we as a team could help somebody live a safer life and see them 6 months later and they were thriving, going back to school or they had a
Mm,
new job and I just loved that. And I wanted to write about that. And so, this book, when I started it, notwithstanding the fact that we're talking, we have carnival workers, the first pass or so with this thing was kind of maudlin. And I went, well, that's not really me. And then
hmm
I got real clear with myself and sort of peaceful with the fact that I have gotten through my darkest times on the job, uh, family stuff, medical stuff, my deepest, darkest periods I've gotten through because of humor. That
hmm
wry sense of humor, it might be mirthless, but you're laughing in the face of bad, and you're not getting me today. And so once I figured that out, I was like, okay, it's kind of a dark comedy. That's where I need to go with this. And then it all started falling into place. So, this is a story about an amusement park owner. The
hmm
carnival became an amusement park, and she's been arguing with her dead adoptive father for 30 years. He was a hellfire and brimstone minister, very controlling, emotionally abusive. She got away from him for a while, but then uh, he left her the property, big piece of property, and she had a little girl, a little baby, and she didn't know what she was going to do to take care of the child. So she accepts going back into that place that she got away
I
from, but
see.
he
Uh-huh.
puts these weird stipulations in the will that she has to abide by if she wants to keep the property. They're really strange, but she's angry. She's frustrated with him. He's made her do these weird things, and he was always controlling when he was alive. But I think more importantly, she's angry at herself for abiding by this, even though it was the practical thing to do. And we all have these decisions we make that we're like, oh, I'm so mad at myself for doing that.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the right thing to do, but we can only get past it when we forgive ourselves.
And is the novel set in Arkansas?
Set in Texas. I grew up in Texas, and Southwest Texas. It's an imaginary place called Elixir Springs, and it takes place from 1969 to 1999.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm going back to thinking when you were describing this, carnival that wintered in the town where you were staying and just this almost like a ghost town carnival. I don't know. I was like, "Oh, I can definitely understand how that would be inspiration." And you've got all these carnival workers and yeah, what a great inspiration. And then to draw in some of your police work and your understanding of kind of what makes people you know do the things they do or stay in these relationships and yeah that it all just sounds
Mm.
really fascinating. So okay, so you worked on this novel, you kind of had an epiphany about okay, this is really a dark comedy. What happened next? Did you start querying agents with it?
So I worked on it for a while, had a couple, two or three drafts in, did some query. I was in the trenches for a while, nothing, 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 and I put it away. It literally, the proverbial put it in a drawer and go to something else. And I worked on a couple of other novels, came back to it, made another pass or two, started querying again. And that time I got a couple of agents that were interested
Hmm.
and got some full requests. And one of them I really liked, and she offered representation, and we went into business together. And it was great. I just really liked this woman. She was brilliant in terms of her editorial skills. She pulled stuff out of me that I hadn't thought about. That just really a good working relationship. We went on submission for about 2.5 years, and one of the other novels, briefly. Mostly it was about this one, and she emailed me one day. She said we have to have a meeting, and it was it was that breakup tone kind of
Oh yeah, I
we need to
could
talk.
tell it
and
was a we need to talk situation. Yeah.
and so we had lived in New Mexico for many years by that time, and we had just moved back here. My father wasn't doing well, so we moved back to Arkansas, and and I pull over. There's this little park and Wilson Park, and I pull over in Wilson Park, and there's this castle at Wilson Park, and I sat by the castle. I knew it was getting ready to happen, and she was very upset, like truly, genuinely emotional. And I started. She wasn't going to betray her boss, but I started getting the impression that this came from a bureaucrat. You've
Mm,
had enough time, and
hmm.
and that made me feel a little better. Not great, but I it's like okay, she would probably have preferred to keep going,
Hmm.
but we were done. And that was,
Because, sorry to interrupt, but so at this point, it was like she had tried to sell like two of
mhm,
your novels and hadn't been able to sell them, and was
yeah,
kind of from on high hearing, okay, it's time to move on.
yeah, two different genres. This one and the other one's a detective mystery. I kind of lumped that and sort of got down in the mud pit and wallowed there for a little bit, and then came out of it. And this is kind of a quirky thing, but I've been a member of the Women's Fiction Writers Association for 9 years now, and because of this novel. And I kind of reached out to some folks that I knew, and this publisher that I ultimately went with kept coming up. The publisher's Black Rose. And Black Rose, I was somewhat mildly concerned because they used to be hybrid, and I don't mind hybrid. I don't have any problem with hybrid at all. But for me, I wanted a publisher with some skin in the game.
Hmm.
And the people in the Women's Fiction Writers Association, WFWA, were pretty high on them. There were about 8 or 10 authors that had gone with them and really liked the experience. So I reached out to them and they liked it. So then I reached out to Black Rose, pitched them, and about 4 months later, they came back and said, "Yeah, we'd like to make you an offer." And so then, more due diligence, I reached out to 12 more authors
Oh, wow.
that I
Yeah.
didn't know, and 10 of them loved it. One of them was ambivalent. And the ones that loved it said, the cover, formatting, great. And these people who own this thing are really good at the marketing.
Mm.
Well, that's my big bugaboo. And I think it's a lot of people's. And so, well, if they're really good at the marketing and I want to learn marketing, that sounds like some good hands-on experience that I can watch and be mentored. So anyway, I had a Zoom meeting with the owner, and it went pretty well, and I signed that day. And I have enjoyed the experience.
Yeah.
It hadn't been flawless, but pretty good. And what we came up with is something I'm proud of.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is, how did you decide that you were going to join the Women's Fiction Association?
So this book, Carousel Grift, had a different title at the time, but I have a friend who is an English teacher, and I took it to her and I said, "Would you read this thing? Would you just tell me what's going on?" And she said, "Yeah." And so a few days later, she said, "This is great. I really loved it. And by the way, did you know you wrote women's fiction?" And I said, "What's women's fiction?" And I was an English major, but I had never heard that term before, and I was really in the dark. I was naive, but I didn't know. So I Googled it, and that came up with the Women's Fiction Writers Association, one of the first hits. And their guiding scribe at that time was a woman named Barbara Claypole White, who was prolific and brilliant and one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. And I reached out to her via email through their website. I said, "Hey, first of all, I'm a guy, but my friend says I wrote this thing, and let me." And I gave her a little blurb about what it was, and she got back that day and she said, "Yeah, that's women's fiction. It's all about the character arc, the growth of your protagonist and maybe some of the other characters. And I really encourage you to join." And I said, "Yeah, but I may have mentioned before, but I'm a guy." And she said, "We don't care. It's all about the story. You're fine." She said, "There are only a few males, but you're welcome, and we will welcome you." And I'm a member of three national writers groups, and by far, WFWA has been the most supportive and has been instrumental in me taking my writing skills to a next level. They immediately got me with a critique group. There were four of us. I'm lifelong friends with two of those women and friends with the third one, but lifelong friends with two of those women. We will be reading each other's work forever. And they made me a better writer. And I just appreciate them so much. Last year, in a very quirky set of events, they reached out to me and they said, "Hey, would you be open to being on the board of directors?
Oh,
It's a
wow.
2-year gig." Really? You want me? And they did. And so I ran unopposed. It was a rough election.
Yeah.
Really tough. Yeah, I am now the secretary on the board of the Women's Fiction Writers. Worst secretary ever. I really am not good at the note taking, everything. They still have to help me, but they tolerate me. But I may lend a different perspective to the board meetings.
Yeah. Well, you need to add that to your bio because it is an interesting tidbit, I think, that you're on the board of the Women's Fiction Writers Association. Every single person, or almost every single person I've had on this podcast, has talked about the importance of community and to find, your writer friends, find whether it's a critique group or just people that you can commiserate with, because it's so, as you know, it's such a long and emotional and hard journey that you need those people. And it's good to know that you found them. I mean, I guess, do you mostly meet online or do you ever see your critique group in person?
I have met one of them in person in Albuquerque. She and her husband came for a vacation, and that we were living there, and so we took them to the oldest restaurant in Albuquerque, probably one of the oldest restaurants in North America. It dates back to the 1700s. It was a really nice time to meet her in person. And we've just kind of kept up with each other's kids and, we know what's
Yeah.
going on. The rest has been pretty much online.
But I mean, I think that's great to hear that, no matter where you live, you can find a community online and make these lifelong friends. And I'm a little bit of a cheapskate, and in the past have been like, I don't know, do I want to pay the membership fee? But then it's so worth it if you get that community out of it and you get that support out of it and everything.
It has been for me.
Yeah. Well, so then my other question, and I should preface this by saying that, I had written this article on Jane Friedman's blog, kind of talking about my experience with having two novels die in submission and feeling kind of depressed about that. And how do I, get back the gumption to go back to writing? And then you reached out to me and said, oh my gosh, this is so similar to my experience. And
Right.
so you had mentioned that you felt kind of like frustrated and you took a year off from writing. When was that you kind of hit that, I don't know if we want to call it a low point, but hit that point where you just were like, I have to take a break from this. And then what did you do to kind of get back the drive to keep trying?
Yeah. So that happened after the agent and I dropped off. Still friends with her. I mean, it was amicable. We
Hmm.
communicate every once in a while. But I just wasn't very I wasn't prolific. I wasn't doing a lot of work. I was dabbling maybe. And then I ended up having throat cancer.
Oh, wow.
And it was weird because I'm pretty healthy and I don't smoke, I don't chew tobacco. I just went full ride, two surgeries. One of them was robotic surgery. It was kind of
Oh
creeping
my
up toward my
gosh.
brain and I did chemo and radiation. I was devastated physically. I was really weak. I had been since I took my pension when my wife got a promotion. We went to Kansas City first, and then we went to Albuquerque. And so when she went to Kansas City and still let me go with her, I was eligible for my pension. I took that, but I've been teaching professional development primarily to veteran officers, detectives on investigative skills. And so I just took that on the road and I started doing that in Missouri and Kansas and that was fine. And then we moved to Albuquerque. I was planning to do that there, and that's when I got sick. And so I came out of that with really no voice, like
Mm,
barely above a whisper, and it hurt to talk.
hmm.
So teaching the way I'd been doing it was not an option. And I just didn't feel good. I was recovering, and I had this conversation with my son, and he said, what do you want to do? And it was sort of this spark. And a couple of sparks happened. One, I said, I've kind of always wanted to go to film school. I think I want to go to film school. And so I enrolled in a program in Albuquerque. Albuquerque's a big film city.
Oh
A
yeah,
lot
that's right. Yeah.
and so lots of work and lots of training for that. And I went there and I learned all the hands-on stuff, grip and lighting and set deck and all that stuff, but also editing. And I directed a couple films. I directed a book trailer at one point.
Wow. Look at you.
And the experience of learning how to edit film was another level up for me in terms of my writing. Because when you think not just in terms of beats, not just in terms of scenes, but cuts and scenes,
Yeah.
and who's facing whom and who's speaking in this moment, and what's the light like, and all that comes into play as you're writing prose. And so it was just one more way that I feel like it really helped me become a better writer. And so I was doing that, and I said, "Man, David, you got to get to work, man. You're not writing this enough.
Mm-hmm.
Being feeling sorry for yourself. Let's get going." I pulled Carousel Grift back out, and I went, this is pretty good, but I know how I can make it better. It was just like a reignition of that passion, and
Mm-hmm.
it became a bucket list. It became, it was this. We all face, you face a kind of a life and death thing, and you go, man, I've got to get back on it. Life is calling, and this is silly, and I've got things I said I was going to do. I'm going to do them. So let's get going. And I have just been on fire since then, and have uh, done a lot of work. Every time I finish a piece of work, whether it's a screenplay or a novel, I go back to everything I've done before and reread it and adjust and tweak from there because every time you write something big, I feel like you have, if you're honest, you have to become better at it.
Mm-hmm.
Experience and practice counts. And so then I go back. It's been an evolution in the pursuit of being better.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry to hear about the throat cancer and glad you're okay. But I think this is all really it's just really fascinating. And I feel like when you're stuck or when you're feeling uninspired, it's a great idea to try some different genre or different creative, like you were not maybe feeling inspired to work on your novel. So you're like, I'm going to study film and directing and
Hmm.
screenwriting. And then it kind of, I don't know, I've heard that before about, oh, like all novel writers should take a poetry class. More tools in your toolbox, like kind of
More tools.
thing.
That's a great way to say it.
Yeah,
I agree.
so you actually studied film and you've written some screenplays, is that right?
I have. Every novel I've written, I've also written as a screenplay. Generally, I do that first because it becomes a great outline, and you can knock out a screenplay in a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fast writer. I'm very methodical, and I go back and forth. So if I write it as a screenplay first, I can have the story down in a very cinematic way. I understand what it looks like. I understand kind of what it's supposed to sound like. And then I use that as the template, the outline for the novel, go write the novel,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to be better because any pantser will tell you you're going to think of new things as your fingers are on home row. And so then I take that back to the screenplay, and I'll go back and forth between the two 6, 8 times before I feel like I'm even close to being done.
That's an interesting process. That's cool. I mean, so I'm a writing instructor, and one of the things that I'll tell my students is the modern reader expects to be able to kind of see things play out in their mind like a movie. And so if I'm reading something and I can't picture where the characters are, or I'm like, what the surroundings look like, I need, it doesn't have to be a lot, but I need some of those to kind of so that I can see it playing out in my mind. And so yeah, if you've already got the kind of the movie version of it and then you kind of go back and forth, that's an interesting process.
Hmm.
Okay, so then you went back to Carousel Grift kind of with more of an eye to the cinematic, tool that you now had. And then you kind of got the tip from your women's writers friends, oh, maybe check out Black Rose. And they're a traditional indie publisher, right? Where you don't need to have an agent.
Traditional independent, they're in San Antonio, Texas, which was not a bad thing for this
Yeah, it's
book.
set in
It's set
Texas,
in,
so.
west of San Antonio, and I think that may have been a draw for them too. They don't pay in advance. I knew that going in, and it was just going back to my original statement. It was skin in the game. We're going to partner together because I can figure out how to independently publish my own books. I mean, those tools are there, but I didn't want a mentor, and I didn't want to be able to be in a position where I can watch and learn. So I have a choice in the matter. I like the product enough to where I'm open to doing another project with them.
Yeah.
I'm no different than anyone else. I would love a top five publisher contract at some point in my life, but I also know that, I'm kind of like a garage band kind of guy. I may break out here in a minute. I fully plan to break out here in a minute, but I have to break out before some of those people will
Yeah.
look at me. And so once I got clear about that, then the mission to me is clear. I need to produce a good product. I need to tell people about it, and then I can go back to those big houses if I still want to do that, and see if they're interested then. By the way, not that it matters to you because this is a podcast, but I've got two hummingbirds right outside my window saying hello to all
Oh,
of us. So
I love hummingbirds, and they always make me think of my grandfather who passed because he was a nature photographer and he would get the most incredible photos of hummingbirds. So yeah, so
oh wow,
whenever
that's cool.
whenever I
I
see a
love
hummingbird,
that.
I think of him. So maybe he's here with us listening to your story. I don't know.
I hope he's here with us. I'm sure he is.
Well, so we're recording this in September, but your book, when this episode comes out, your book will have just come out on October 23rd. So, are you planning anything? What are you doing to get ready for your book launch?
We sent out over 200 advanced reader copy digital copies to people who are interested in my network, my wife's network. My entire family has reached out to people they know are readers and said, "Hey, would you read this thing? Would you be willing to read this thing and write a review on October 23rd?" And we've gotten a really nice response from that. A lot of very gracious people out there who have read or are reading it and have committed to writing a review. We are doing a book Goodreads giveaway. We're petitioning for a book club deal. We're going to do some paid marketing, Amazon and Facebook, that kind of stuff, which is really not my area of strength. I'm really glad the publishers, taking the lead role on
That's
that.
what I was going to ask because you're saying we, so I was thinking, okay, so do you have a publicist at the publisher or is it kind of a smaller operation than that? And yeah, how does that work?
There is a person who is in charge of the publicist stuff, and then there's a person who's over the direct marketing, like setting up those Amazon and Facebook ads, and I'm really excited to see how that comes out. And then just within the last I don't know 10 days, we hired the actress for the audio version.
Oh, cool.
That's another skin in the game thing. They're paying for that.
Hmm.
I'm not paying for that. I
Yeah.
love that. And so we went through about 30 auditions, and I was very specific about what I wanted. It had to be a Texas accented kind of a lilt to the voice, and somebody able to do different voices because there are other characters in this thing. And after literally 30 plus auditions, we found her, and she's awesome. And she's going to be here for a book launch party we're going to have in November. She's going to do the reading.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
My wife's going to introduce us. My son is going to play guitar. He's a musician, so he's going to play us in, and then I'll talk a little bit, and then this woman is going to read, and then we'll do a Q&A. And I'm kind of jazzed about that. That's
Oh,
going to be
that sounds
fun.
really cool. I mean, what a great idea to have the person who does the audiobook come to the book launch and do a reading and give people a taste of what the
Yeah.
audiobook is like. Well, how exciting that this book that, quote unquote, died on submission with your previous agent is now,
Hmm.
going to be out in the world, and that's super exciting. It gives us all hope that well, and I feel like I've heard that from a lot of authors as they say, I don't like the term died on submission because, you never know what could happen. You put that book away, but it might come back. So who knows? Your other novel, the detective, you said it's like a thriller
Hmm.
detective novel. We
Hmm.
we may see it at some point. Fingers crossed.
You're gonna see it.
Yep.
It's gonna happen,
Yep.
man.
So speaking of detective crime novels, you also write this monthly column for Killer Nashville magazine, and it's articles for writers who are writing mystery or thriller or crime novels or detective novels to kind of help them understand what real police work is like, right?
Right.
I saw your website. You have trainings for writers, like what every writer should know about real police work. So I'm interested in this because I do write thrillers. They're not like real procedurals or anything, but I am curious to know what are some common misconceptions that people often have, or things that you see that you have to set people straight on.
So there are a long list of things, but there are two big ones. One is all things search warrant. There's a lot of misconception about when does an officer need a search warrant? How does he get one? What would that process be? And people have a lot of questions about that, and that's great. That's what I do. And the other one is sort of twofold. One is suspect interview and interrogation. And I was a closer in my last job. My job was to get confessions, and so that's something I hold dear. And the other one is how to talk to victims, traumatized victims. And so I teach a class to police officers, but also sometimes to writers on trauma-informed victim interviewing, which is a very different skill set. And so when you read somebody's scene and they are talking to a victim or a suspect, oftentimes it's like a copy of a copy. They've seen a
Hmm.
cop hit a bad guy with in the back of the head with a phone book. And so their cop screams and curses and does something abusive. And if they want to paint a picture of a bad cop, rock on. That's a direction you can go. But if they're trying to do it in an earnest way, where their fictional detective is in earnest trying to get a confession, trying to find the truth, that's not how it's done in real life. It's actually kind of a quiet process. I wouldn't call it friendly, but it is not hostile because you're trying to get somebody to tell you the biggest secret of their life,
Hmm.
their deepest, darkest held secret. And to belittle them, to act indignant is counterproductive. It doesn't work. They just are not going to tell you
Right.
that truth. And they're probably going to ask for an attorney. And so, and, a bunch of defense attorneys just roll their eyes out there because, they will tell their clients, don't talk to somebody like me. And they're right. They shouldn't. But I'm
Yeah.
going to get the truth. But if somebody's talking and I'm a detective and it's a violent crime and I am compelled and duty bound to solve it, then I'm going to use the tools of my trade, and that includes psychology. And part of that psychology is we don't scream at people, we don't curse at them, we don't act like we hate them. We want to get to the truth, and so we act like we want to have a conversation with them, and that's a different mindset than a lot of
Hmm.
people who watch a lot of Hollywood, where I grant you it's not as exciting or dramatic, but if they're looking for truth.
Yeah. Well, and I'm trying to remember, but I believe that Killer Nashville has a conference every year, right? Is that right? Where they do
Hmm.
have,
Hmm.
police officers or former police officers like yourself, where you can ask questions. And because I think you can Google stuff and you can watch TV shows, but it's not going to probably give you the real, what it's really like. So I think it's a really good resource, and people should check out your website because I think you have some resources on there. Well, and you said like, oh, maybe it's not as exciting, but I think it's kind of fascinating to like use psychology and kind of build trust with someone to try to get them to confess like that. I think that could be a very interesting scene.
Well, I certainly hope so.
Well, you've got such a fascinating and diverse career, and is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to mention about your writing life?
I'm never going to stop. This is, I'm just dedicated to this. This is part of my life, and I want it to be part of my
Yeah.
legacy. I do want to mention on Carousel Grift, just a quick little
Mm.
trigger warning. There is a vasectomy scene. It's not bloody. I'm not graphic, but the guys in the audience will probably cross their legs.
Okay. Fair warning.
I just feel like I needed to tell my fellow males.
Well, so I end every episode with a tip for the road for my listeners. So do you have maybe one tip that is close to your heart about writing, or maybe about crime writing, or about publishing, or anything else in the writing life?
So one is what we talked about. Learn a different form of writing because that will really inform the kind of writing you
Yeah.
want to do. So if you want to write novels, learn poetry or at least learn about it or learn how to write screenplays or short stories. And conversely, if you want to write screenplays, you should learn some of
Hmm.
these other skills. And though they really are symbiotic and I just think boosts performance. And the other one has to do with something we've touched on several times, and that's just the resilience factor, the perseverance factor. This is a long road, and I'll see people on social media and they'll go, "I queried 5 people and nothing happened. I'm done." It's like, oh man, no,
You've
no, that's not
only just
the way this
begun.
works.
Yeah.
And so I want to analogize it with things like that are also really energetic, hard drive, high discipline, high commitment professions like
Mm.
medicine. You don't have a kid wants to be a medical doctor. They're probably going to start that science in junior high, and they're going to be in their 30s before they're actually doing the job they've dreamed of. This is a dream job, and a lot of people dream it, but dreams are like clouds, man. If you don't have an action plan and you're not willing to put that into action, it's just going to wisp away. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can go on to a different dream, but if this is it, you got to be in this for the long haul. This is commitment, and it's an important one. And I admire every writer out there that is committed to this.
Well said, and I agree with both pieces of advice. Well, thank you so much, David. It's been so fun to talk to you and hear about all the things that you're doing, and I can't wait to read Carousel Grift.
It has been great. I appreciate you very
Yeah.
much. This was fun.
The Long Road to Publishing is produced and edited by me, Eva Langston, and the intro and outro music comes from the artist Soundroll on Upbeat. You can find me online on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. Even better, find my newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com, and feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more stories about the long and winding path to publishing and more tips for the road.